And welcome back to Dr. Drill's Making Motivation podcast, where it is our mission to honor interesting and authentic people and tell their stories. In the process, it's our goal to inform and inspire the listener, strive to put smiles on faces, and a little fire under the asses of the masses. Today is March 1st, 2024. I'd like you all to welcome my friend Andrew Sack, or Drew Sack here with, can I call you Drew? All right. We're going to be talking about making motivation around making marijuana. My friend has worked in the cannabis industry for quite some time and is currently the COO of a startup cannabis company in Northwest Jersey called Glass Meadows. Welcome, Drew.
How are you doing?
I'm really good, man. I appreciate you coming on this podcast and having a little talk with me. Just laying a little groundwork. My perspective on the cannabis industry is that growing up, of course, and we're talking about in the 80s now, I know marijuana was pretty common. It was probably the most common street drug, and next to alcohol, it was fairly ubiquitous. It was also illegal at the time, and so it was something that you would hear about people doing, and it was on the down low, but it was still kind of like it was a pretty common thing. So a lot has changed since those days. You know, I'm talking about here. I wrote some notes here. I decided to join the military from a pretty early age. I was like 15 or 16, and then they had a no tolerance policy for any sort of drugs. But when I got in the Corps and started serving, alcohol, it flowed like water, and so that's what we did. We worked hard and played hard and drank a lot of beer and got into plenty of trouble around that, using the use of that substance, which of course is still, on every street corner. There's a bar, there's a restaurant, there's a package store, and yet for the longest time, a drug like marijuana has been designated as Schedule 1. Is that correct? The designation of marijuana as on par with like hard drugs like cocaine and shit like that. Yeah. So, which is kind of ridiculous. Yes,
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Because the side effect, the effects and the side effects seem to be, the downside is not seen. It's comparatively small. So then recently, I guess within the last 10 years. There's been a lot of efforts. There's been a bunch of states that have gone medical marijuana, that have welcomed medical marijuana, and then recreational marijuana. I know that Pennsylvania currently has medical, not recreational yet.
No,
okay,
just medical.
Okay, and I know Jersey has both medical and recreational. Mm-hmm. Correct. So little personal story. Okay, of course, I'm working healthcare, and this podcast and our discussion has no reflection necessarily on the work that I do in my practice or anything like that. It's just a personal interest, and you're a very interesting guy, so I thought we would have a nice discussion. But about 10 years ago, I started having a situation. I started experiencing some anxiety in my life, and up to that point, I didn't think I was scared of anything. But all of a sudden, it just like debilitating, take the wind out of your sails. I couldn't breathe, shit like that. And so I was wondering what was going on with that. And I went to my family doctor, and he prescribed me a variety of medicines. Among them, an anti-anxiety med, such as Ativan. And then there were some antidepressants and things like that. And I never really liked taking these things. I certainly did up front because I was in quite a bit of discomfort, but I wanted to get away from as quickly as I could. So I heard all this buzz. Being in alternative medicine, there was a lot of buzz going around about CBD, which is a derivative of hemp, like hemp oil, for the listener and those out of the loop, and some of the claims about hemp oil, CBD, which stands for, correct me if I'm wrong, cannabidiol. Yeah, all right, so cannabidiol. So there's some various properties of hemp oil itself, which has no psychoactive effect, similar to THC, and but it was said to chill people out, and I thought it maybe give me some sleep and relieve my anxiety, which it did in part. But then I eventually wound up with my family doctor, and he said I can get you under consideration for a medical card, which would allow me to go to local dispensaries in Pennsylvania for medical marijuana. Long story short, just with a few drops in my tea before I hit the rack, it chills me out. It allows me to sleep more restfully, and it's been a game changer. I no longer have to take those pharmaceuticals. So I share that to with folks who've had similar experiences, and so I'm a believer in cannabis and its benefits. Now, I looked up some things. This is just for the listener, but I looked up some stuff on ChatGTP, which is our little AI search utility here. It talked about the benefits of cannabis. It can vary depending upon the individual and specific use. Some potential benefits include pain relief, reduction of inflammation, management of certain medical conditions such as epilepsy and multiple sclerosis, alleviation of anxiety and depression, and improvement of sleep quality. So if it can put even a small dent in any of those maladies, then we're in business. Now, I also, to be fair, looked up side effects, and it says impaired cognitive function, just like most controlled substances, attention, memory, depending upon the use, respiratory issues for some, depending upon the way that it's taken in, can have some addictive properties, mental health effects. I've heard about some incidences of psychosis with certain susceptible individuals, cardiovascular effects, impaired motor skills, and legal implications, which up to the recently, they were putting people in prison, right, for possession of certain quantities of cannabis. So there's clearly some benefits and there's some drawbacks, just like with anything. I also looked up the history of cannabis because I wanted to bone up in preparation for this podcast, and it says ancient use, cannabis was cultivated and used for its fiber, seeds, and medicinal properties for thousands of years. It was used medicinally in ancient China, India, Egypt, and other civilizations. They traded it and made it into textiles, ropes, and medicinal preparations. It was introduced in the Western world in the 19th century, and it was quickly stigmatized. In the early 19th or 20th century, attitudes towards cannabis began to shift and became increasingly stigmatized, concerned about its psychoactive effects and alleged negative societal impacts led to its prohibition. And then prohibition escalated, and then in modern times there's been legalization and medical use. There's been quite a bit of research that's begun to be conducted. The shift has been driven by evolving scientific research on cannabis, medicinal properties, as well as changing societal attitudes. And as of the early 2020s, cannabis legalization efforts continue in many parts of the world, with some countries legalizing it for medical and or recreational use, while others maintain strict prohibition. So I just want to get that out there for the listener, just so we could have a general overview and understanding of the cannabis as a substance. And we got some, let's do a little back and forth of slang terms for cannabis. Weed.
Yeah.
Pot.
Yeah. Chronic.
Ganja. Or again, one of my favorites is the devil's lettuce.
Yeah.
The devil's lettuce. So the various slang terms, and but like I said, it's substance that's helped me. I know a lot of people have approached it and use it in various capacities, so it can be quite helpful. So tell us a little bit about your line of work there. I understand, as I said, you're the chief operating officer of a cannabis company.
Yes. So, in regards to, what I do is highly regulated. It's it's a interesting line of work because it's federally illegal.
Illegal.
Federally illegal.
Yeah.
So technically we're, breaking the law, from federal standards. And it's also, and something that's interesting about that is that there's major tax implications because of that. So because of the fact that it's still federally illegal, we as cannabis companies don't have the same types of tax write-offs that regular companies do. And so it's harder to make money than people think it is.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense. It's something that I don't think most people know, because they think like, well, I can just get this from Joe Blow on the corner. Why, they go through all this regulation and all that stuff, and I'm paying more. Right. So, so in order to do that, in order to be profitable and put forth the best product, you have to, and the taxes and all that stuff. So you got to jump through those hoops.
And that's why that's why I wanted to talk about the illicit market versus the legal market, because that's another thing that's interesting about working in this industry, is that we probably face a larger illicit market than any other legal industry market, because of the fact that it was an illicit market for so long, and that illicit market was so robust that it still exists today.
Right.
And then we're constantly challenging that. And then we have to put up with the mistakes that some places make, like, for example, Oklahoma, who, put too loose of, restrictions in place, and then their market got out of control. Their medical market got out of control, their recreational market got out of control with the licensing, and all of the cartel and the and other gang money showed up, and then those quote unquote legal grows are the grows that are fueling the illicit markets in places like New York State and here in Pennsylvania.
Really? So how do you combat that? How do you strategize and eliminate that competition?
Well, through education, right? Trying to tell people that, we have to put our products through stringent testing and make sure that there's no heavy metal, like residual heavy metals, no pesticides, no yeast and mold, things of that nature. Whereas everything you buy off the street is not tested, is not regulated, so who knows what you're smoking or vaping.
And that's a great peace of mind to have, right? And know that that if you're going to consume something, especially if we're going to call it medical grade, right? We want to make sure that that it's of a certain standard, so that we can expect a certain result.
Especially here in Pennsylvania, the prices are extremely competitive with the illicit market. So, there's really no excuse that if you're a marijuana consumer in the state of Pennsylvania, there's really no excuse at this point to not have a medical card.
Right.
Because it's
pretty affordable.
It's affordable, and there's that gray area too where, I would speak openly about the fact that we call it medical marijuana, but it's really, might as well be recreational, because these, the doctors that are out there handing out scripts will hand out a script to just about anyone that says that they have pain or anxiety. And so, the reality is I just renewed my card, and I was on the phone with the doctor for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
In my house. And it cost me $50, and I have my card renewed.
Interesting.
And so, the reality is that it just makes sense to go get a card and not put yourself in risk of being in a situation where you're using it illegally.
Right.
When you could be using it legally.
Yeah, or a quality or product that you don't really know what it is, or
exactly.
So So tell us, you said earlier that you started in Colorado, right? You got involved in the industry. Tell us the beginnings of your involvement in the cannabis industry.
So I was living in Denver, Colorado, and it was 2011, and Denver was still an up and coming city at that time. It was growing, but it was still a Midwest city very much, but it was on the up and up, and so I moved there, and I became friends with some dispensary owners. I got my medical card. I started going to the local dispensary. I made friends with them, and I had was familiar with doing farm work. I was from Kansas, and I said, hey, if you guys need help, I'm available to work. I have farm experience, so on and so forth. So they put me to work, and I started working in the dispensary some days. I'd work in the grow. I'd work trimming. I'd do everything you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started there, and just to kind of paint a picture, that was that was in a warehouse filled with Connex boxes or sea containers with window units in the back of them, and it was and in each one of those Connex boxes was a little individual grow room, and it was hot as hell, and we would open the garage door and put a swamp cooler in the front to try and cool down the warehouse, but it was really just an open warehouse with no environmental cooling for any of the employees or anything like that. Rough working conditions, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how all the grows were back then, most of them. And then 2012 came around, and Denver legalized recreational marijuana, and then that's when I jumped ship and was recruited over to a company called Kind Love, and we built they had two existing grows that were nicer, but still kind of like nicer for that time period. But then that's when all this money flowed in, and we started to see Denver really go crazy. You couldn't find a warehouse anywhere, and they started popping up these huge grows, and big money was flowing in, and that's when you started hearing of people building these state-of-the-art grows with all the bells and whistles and so on and so forth. And so I did that, and we built a very big, quote unquote state-of-the-art grow facility, and we shut the other smaller ones down. And I stayed there for roughly 3 years, but then the market was getting extremely saturated, and I just didn't foresee the Denver market being a good place for my growth. So an opportunity came for me to go start a grow in Puerto Rico in an old pharmaceutical factory. So I packed up all my stuff, and I moved to Puerto Rico, and started a large grow facility there. And it was really fun and an extremely good learning experience. But then my wife at the time was not super ecstatic about being down in Puerto Rico with our, that then 6-week-old baby by herself. So we stayed for a year, and then Pennsylvania became legalized medical at that time in 2016. And so I called into my network of friends and found, told them to, connect me with someone in Pennsylvania who had won a license. So I met with a group called Ilera Healthcare, and that's when I came to Pennsylvania, and I was the third employee hired at Ilera Healthcare, and then we grew that company into what would become the largest Pennsylvania grower processor at that time. And so I built that company with them from the ground up in Waterfall, Pennsylvania.
Waterfall, you said?
Yeah, which is in south central PA.
Yeah.
Over by Chambersburg area.
Yeah.
And so it was in the middle of nowhere in Fulton County, Pennsylvania. This is the only county in Pennsylvania where no train ever came through. So it's a very poverty-stricken, very red, conservative county. But they welcomed us with open arms, and we had a very successful facility with, at one point, upwards of 300 employees.
Wow.
And so, then we were acquired by TerraSend, which was a public MSO. And so then I became the VP of operations for the Northeast for TerraSend for a couple years. And then I branched out on my own to go be in the world of consulting and, business therapy or, leadership coaching, things of that nature.
And I think that's where I might have met you, Drew. I mean, or some of our earliest conversations about this involved you. I mean, I remember you saying, we're flying to Louisiana. You're describing some of the circumstances or the, what it's like. And I'm imagining like, all right, this guy's getting on a plane. He's flying to Louisiana. What would a visit like that? You said business therapy or, help. You're showing them how to, showing them the ropes, right? How to be successful in the industry, or.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, yes, I know a lot about, growing cannabis and extracting cannabis and processing it and working it through the system, but, what I do now versus what I did in the beginning are so much different. I got into this for a love of growing plants and nurtured really a love for growing of people.
Wow.
And so now I love to grow people much more than I like growing plants.
People that are growing plants, you grow the people that are growing plants.
Yeah. So, but, listen, what that would entail for that particular thing, in a lot of what I call, business therapy, it's like, I fly down, let's say, we'll role play, I fly down to Louisiana and in this instance, the company is in a little bit of, a little bent out of shape and morale's a little bent out of shape. And so, I kind of just go down and streamline communications and be an ear and a shoulder, to vent on for, upper management and then, really redefine, our standard operating procedures, redefine our policies as a company, revisit our vision and our mission and go work my way through the entire system, as I see these plants being, well-oiled machines. And so we just, kind of work out all the bottlenecks, see where there's problems, see where there's personnel issues, and kind of just help, what is usually, young managers work through these problems so that we can get to a place where we're a much more efficient, much more happy, conducive place to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a lot of what I would do.
Yeah.
I would tour through the facilities, obviously, and go look at the plants and see what's going on and make recommendations and stuff like that. But there's so many more people out there, that are better at growing plants than me or extracting the plants than me. What I really do is get people around a table to accomplish goals and missions effectively and efficiently.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's not what I thought. I guess that's why I wanted to sit down with you, because I wanted to know more about it myself. What is the most common bottleneck you run into? Let's say you come down to my plant. What is the most common malfunction? I mean, other than people, when we talk about, and that's in my experiences, you can have the greatest process in the world. People are often become the bottleneck a lot of times.
Yeah, sure. I mean, disgruntled individuals definitely become the bottleneck. Usually if people are producing flower, usually the trim department is very often a bottleneck. One, it's definitely where HR nightmares are made of, and then two, it's just a very tedious process to trim the flower, and it seems to be one of the biggest things people complain about. And so, and it's a job that really no one wants to do. So it is. That is usually the bottleneck. I spend more time fixing that whole kind of area more than anywhere else.
People cutting buds off of the tree.
People cutting buds off of the tree and then cutting the leaves off of the buds.
Okay.
And it's always a trouble area.
Why the HR nightmare?
It's a boring,
Okay.
meticulous job that it's like a bunch. It's like having a room full of dishwashers,
Okay.
washing dishes all day long, every day.
And they're freaking pissed about it.
And they are pissed about it, and then they start chatting to one another, and
Hey, this sucks.
exactly.
Such and such is getting better treatment.
Yep.
So how would you plug that hole? How would you fix that?
Well, you try and give people privileges. Maybe you listen on music on headphones, or you just But at the end of the day, it really comes down to just having no nonsense policies, and when people step over that line, you have to reprimand them and make it known that we're not fucking around.
Yeah, manage well.
Yeah, exactly. It really comes down to having a great manager
Yeah.
in that area. Not maybe necessarily someone that knows everything about weed,
Right.
but having someone that really knows very well how to manage people.
So when we talk about you said you had some familiarity with farming growing up. They call marijuana weed. Hey, it should be easy to grow. So how is it similar and different to other crops? Would you say?
Well, it's a huge pain in the ass to grow, but that's mainly due to the fact of how many regulations we have behind it. But I would say that it's not dissimilar from growing tomatoes. But it is, listen, I really like growing the plant, and it is an easy plant to grow. But it is finicky, and it can be messed up easily. Mainly due to the fact that it is a photo period sensitive plant, so in these grows we have to manipulate the light cycle, and which means that if that to keep the plants growing, we have to keep them in a light cycle that's like 18 hours on, 6 hours off, something along that lines, or you just leave the lights on all day long if you wanted to, in a 24-hour light period. But to get the plants to flower, you have to reduce the photo period to 12 hours. And so if in the event that something goes catastrophically wrong, and the lights turn on in that dark period, and someone doesn't know, there's a malfunction, something along those lines, there's a light leak somewhere, the plants can grow hermaphrodites, which then means that the female plants create male pollen, and then they seed out, and then we have seeds, and then of course customers complain, no one wants seed in their products, so then we have to usually extract that product, and then everybody wants the big buds and the frosty buds and dense buds, but the denser and bigger you grow those buds, the more prone those buds typically are to things like mold, or botrytis, is what it's called in formal sense, which plagues other crops as well. So that's kind of the biggest pest that I see, really, is because it can be really hard to control the environment in the grow rooms. So at the end of the day, it is a weed and it does grow easily, but that doesn't mean that it is grown to perfection easily.
Right. What are some things that the public doesn't know or would find interesting about the cannabis industry? Step out. Imagine yourself as a lay person looking in.
Trimming weed.
The trimming of the weed.
The trimming of the weed.
It being a pain in the ass, or
Nobody
how important
knows
it is.
Yeah, no one understands how much of a pain in the ass that is.
And what we imagine, like little cuticle scissors or some shit like that. You're just standing there. There's somebody standing there or sitting there in a seat and just going.
Yep. They're just sitting there in a seat and they're trying to go through a mess of vegetation and it all kind of looks the same, and you got to go through and break it down systematically, and and they make a lot of automation equipment for it nowadays, but it's kind of can be detrimental to the quality, and then the customer complains about that too. So we're all trying to make the customer happy here.
Yeah.
But yeah, trimming the weed. That is like the biggest thing that I don't think that the general public does not know how much effort goes in to making weed look like the way it does by the time you get it in a bag.
Yeah. How about the strains? I'm talking about trimming weed. So I've heard a lot of lore and discussion about indica versus sativa. They say indica puts you into couch, and then sativa has different effects. And then I read somewhere that all the stuff, given the proximity of it, all kind of cross-pollinates and becomes the same thing. What do you think about the strains?
Yeah. So there's not really a lot of true sativas and true indicas out there anymore, and because the truth is no one wants to grow sativas, and so you'll never really kind of see what one would quote unquote refer to as a true sativa in a dispensary, because it doesn't fit in the business plan. A true sativa would need a very extended period of time to flower, like let's say for it to finish flowering would maybe take 11 weeks or 12 weeks, or even just 10 weeks would be far too long. And most growers are looking to, finish their crops in batches and lots in one room, and then clean that whole room out and then reset that entire room. And they want to do that in 9 weeks, because the more times you harvest every year, the more money you make.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap facilities to operate. So you got to keep money coming in. So no one grows those long flowering plants because the money's not there. So, with that being said, there's also a way that I look in. I think in the sense of like there's indica plants and they grow short and squatty, and they generally are more, chill, from an effects perspective. And then there's sativas that are going to be lankier, taller plants with longer flowering times and will kind of be a racier high. That exists, yes. But from my perspective, when you break it down from a chemical perspective, then you're left with carbon, right? Which is the biomass of the flower, and then you have THC, right? And then you have all these other kind of like minor cannabinoids that have some effects, right? That I'm not like a huge expert in, but like CBN can kind of like make you more sleepy, and that's what we see in a lot of the like sleep ratios is CBN mixed with THC, and that's kind of puts you to bed. And then like CBD can help like kind of even out the raciness of THC, and then there's maybe some understanding that THCV is kind of like gives you that kind of those sativa effects, potentially kind of more psychedelic, and but then you have terpenes. And so terpenes, but THCV, THC, THCA, CBD, CBDN, they're all just molecules, right? So they're the same no matter what. But it's the terpenes that so if I consume THC, you know, it should be the same no matter what. But then it's the terpenes and the ratio of the terpenes that actually provide the effects. So the thought that sativa indica hybrid is really just more of a marketing ploy that we have to go along with now. But from a science perspective, we understand that it's maybe not accurate, you know. But so many people shop based on it that like we've tried to educate people about it and we can't really turn away from it. So we're kind of stuck doing it.
The indica sativa thing.
Yes, exactly.
So those nomenclature remains despite it being more complex than that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then other things trickle out, like you were saying, terpenes. And one of the things that I've enjoy is there's one called limonene, which has got a lemon, you know, and then there's one that's called pinene, so pine, almost like a pine needle thing, and these caryophyllene, different chemicals that have effects unto themselves, whether it's a taste or whether it's or there's another something called the entourage effect, right?
Yeah, and they're not specific to cannabis. You know, like those terpenes are in any plant, and there's terpenes everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the whole, you know, essential oil industry is based on, and scents and flavors and natural flavors are all just terpenes.
Yeah.
Like, you know, any like anyone who's like selling natural flavors or, you know, like the cleaners that we get, you know, for our homes.
Pine Sol,
exactly. Like, you know, most all that stuff is extracted from, you know, like you get an orange scent, you know, or orange natural flavors are usually just terpenes extracted from the pillage or waste of like processing for orange juice. So then they would take the leftover orange peels, they would process them down and distill them into orange essential oils, which is just essentially orange terpenes.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So there's an effect unto themselves, right?
Yeah.
But then added to these other elements, like a soup, right?
Exactly, it's the entourage effect.
Yeah. What's your favorite strain? For whatever reason,
I get asked that question all the time, and I guess I guess I don't really have a favorite strain. Is it changes all the time, you know? You know, I guess, you know, lately, you know, I like runts a lot, you know.
Runts.
Yeah.
See, that I asked this because one of the things I noticed when I first went into a dispensary, it was kind of like Willy Wonka, that when they in that opening scene in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. But before they go in his factory and the kids are all running around and they go into that candy shop and they're like, oh, you want a Wonkavator, you want a fucking everlasting gobstopper, you want this and the other thing. There's so much choice, and the names are so attractive. You're like, ooh, this one's called lemon mango surprise or something like that. So this is a scrumdiddlyumptious bar. There's one called ice cream cake. So like it, and that some of them kind of have that. What I learned is that some of them have, you know, you're imagining ice cream cake. That's pretty freaking good, like a Carvel ice cream cake. It's not necessarily gonna taste or smell like that, but there's a lot of choice when you go in. I feel like sometimes it would almost be too much. I would come out with something. I would want something that wasn't too skunky, because it's not something that I'm like a kid, so I'm not toking up around the house or anything like that. I usually would do like a tincture or something like that. But anyway, there's a lot of choice, and so I often wonder. Like, there's one strain that I read up on, and there's apps to this effect, right? So there's Leafly and all these apps where if previous use, so let's say it's Lemon G. I got Lemon G because it had THC, but also had a higher CBD, which was proposed to reduce the effect, make a little bit more mild effect. And so Lemon G is something that I would look for. And of course, it had the lemon terpenes in it. But you see what other people said. This has this effect. It chills you out. It helps you with sleep. It gives you energy. How much stock do you put in some of those ratings or reviews, let's say, and some for some of those apps?
I think for the general public, most of it probably works in the way that, in the fashion that people say, and then I think there's always some individuals who respond differently to that type of a side effect, like maybe say like something that's supposed to get people up when you get some people down, and something that's supposed to make some people go to sleep would make some people stay up all night, or are more alert.
Yeah.
Which is what you see is not uncommon with pharmaceuticals too.
Each effects vary given the different.
Yeah, the effects vary, and at the end of the day, it's a. I always like to say that it is a psychedelic. So it really depends on where you're at in your life, and that the effects, will and may be different, depending on what you're going through.
That's what I've heard in the past too.
If you just got the news that your mother died, well, you're gonna have a much different experience than if you just got word that you got a raise in promotion at work, and it's a Friday night, and you're going out to a big dinner with your friends.
Right. Well, that only makes sense. But so it's going to complement or magnify, or it's going to fall in suit with what you're dealing with at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I had heard that for many years that was a thing. Like you get a certain state of mind that it'll kind of complement that, or so exactly what you said. That makes a lot of sense. Tell me about this new company you're the chief operating officer of there, Drew.
So yeah, Glass Meadows we're a cultivation and manufacturing company for recreational in New Jersey, and we're going to be growing greenhouse flower, and our goal is to essentially put the sun-grown flower that we make into easy form factors. So when I say that, I mean it's all going to be convenient form factors. For example, vape pens, pre-rolls, and gummies. And that is essentially the business plan. That is kind of the top 3 SKUs in the industry, and those are the SKUs that we plan to make. So we're not trying to be the best at everything. We are trying to be very good at those 3 things. Right.
So SKU, is it SKU?
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's like 3 products, like.
Yeah, it's 3 products. So one thing that we're going to make a lot of is a lot of extracts. I just and a lot of pre-rolls, tons of pre-rolls. Just because or joints, just pre-rolled joints, because smoking weed should now this is me putting my recreational hat on, right? Smoking weed should not be a pain in the ass, and so we're trying to take the pain in the ass out of smoking weed, and so that's why we're going to sell convenient form factors. We're going to take the pain in the ass out of it for you.
That's cool.
Yeah,
and appreciated. What is how do you grow cannabis for maximum yield? Like what is how do you ensure it? Now I know you just described the different the light, how crucial particular hours and wavelengths of light, and then prompting it to flower. It's like a trigger, right? And would that be the I was thinking when you were talking about that, is that like the end of the year, like a growing cycle, like winter, spring, summer, fall, like the days get start to shorten or something like that at the end of the growing season? Is that supposed to mimic that? That's what's happening?
Yeah.
And that would cause the fruit, the plants to flower.
Yep.
So that's the trigger for it. That's pretty interesting. So really, really interesting stuff, dude. How about other stuff beyond the THC and the psychedelic components? Like for instance, I saw this ad on Facebook the other day for a company that was extracting CBD gummies. They're making CBD gummies, which I sell here, and they're great. I mean, they're a big seller. People really like them for their chill mode effects, and then also for sleep, stress. And this company had like this. The dude is climbing up a big pile of the actual skeletons of these trees, and they look like friggin' tumbleweeds or something. And a lot of people commenting are like, "Hey, you're gonna do something with that?" So fibers. I heard about hempcrete. Like supposedly you can put it in reinforced concrete with it, or you make clothing and even biofuel shit like that. You seen anything like that in the industry? How they'll repurpose? Because I know the cash cow is
not for us, not in cannabis, no. Just because everything is federal. It's like a very like with our waste, we are forced to have to blend it with like a cocoa substrate or a paper, and then dispose of it in a way that is like recorded and then sent to a landfill or composted. So we can't like recycle anything out of fear that it's going to get into the hands of the illicit market, and that people are going to take our waste or trash and process some sort of products with it, or people will get high.
Oh.
So no one, any state you go into that has one of these programs, their rules are going to look something along the lines of like, all waste must be destroyed to be unusable, unrecognizable under video footage, and then blended with 50% inert materials such as sawdust, spent plant substrates or mediums like soil, for example, and or paper or something along those lines.
You can't reuse get back in the soil. You can't
no.
Can't use it for your own fertilization or anything like that.
No.
Really? How about you said pesticides and all that stuff? It's all screened and filtered out. How about fertilization, soil, shit like that? Anything special about that as apart from other?
Not really. I mean, people will tell you that they have the best fertilizer regime and blah blah blah, but you said something about maximizing yields earlier, and the truth is just if you can maximize your environment, then you can maximize your yields.
Your environment.
Yeah, the other stuff doesn't really matter all that much.
Okay, so environment then is temperature, light.
Yeah, humidity.
Shit like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the? You said your greenhouse is going to be. So there's going to be the sun. You said sun's going to be growing it. Sun.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
But we'll have also artificial lighting in there as well.
Yeah.
For obviously just as well as I do that the sun doesn't come around much here in the wintertime.
Yeah. How about the future of cannabis? Obviously, you're planning for that with this company, and it's awesome. Very exciting that you're going to be a big part of this company. What are some things you see on the horizon in the industry? For instance, I heard, I know that there's some like THC drinks and stuff like that.
Yeah, the THC drinks are kind of cool. But what I see on the horizon for the cannabis industry is for it to continue to kind of keep going the way it is. The truth is that people have been, smoking flower for, decades and decades and decades and centuries, so people aren't going to stop doing that, that's just the truth. So the vaping's not going away, the smoking's not going away. It happens to be a consumable product, just like food or beverage. So we'll keep growing more of it, and people will keep smoking it, and that's how I see the future of cannabis going.
It's here to stay.
It's definitely here to stay, and there's definitely a huge culture around it, and that culture is growing more abundantly, and the taboo is lifting, But, you never have seen a state, and you will not see a state go recreational before it goes medical, because they just go medical first to lift the, the initial taboo, and then they come around with rec.
You think that's coming? It's knocking on our door in PA.
Oh, it's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming. You know, they're talking a lot about it. I know that. I get little, posts and stuff that say that, I know that they're staying on top of it. But, I just really hope that they don't have the state-run dispensaries, because that would really, be kind of a buzzkill.
State-run. You mean they would do it all, or they would really closely?
They're talking about doing state-run dispensaries just like they do with the liquor.
Oh.
Yeah.
So they're going to control, because you mentioned the tax implications. They're also one of the benefits for a state, right? Is that with those sales, they're making revenue, right? I know you were talking about Colorado busting wide open. I forget the figures, but it was huge, like the amount of that the state made.
Yeah, huge, massive.
So what do you think about what do you think about timeline for federal recreational legal? Will that ever completely happen, you think, or?
Yes, I think it will happen, but I don't think it's going to happen soon.
Okay, so states are going to start it, and
and it'll continue on as it has.
Yeah.
And it maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah. Well, last question there, Drew. Regarding all the regulation stuff like that, we're talking about the illicit versus the regulated recreational and medical legality. What do you think about like the war on drugs, generally speaking? Talk about legalization of something, and where I'm going with this is that so you've got a substance that any controlled substance, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or weed or some of the hard drugs, there's there might be some benefit that risk versus benefit analysis, right? So with marijuana, as I mentioned, and cannabis, it's an old plant, it's been around forever. People have been consuming it and using it in various ways, and it's not for everybody, but it's certainly not the villain. Doesn't seem to be the villain that the federal government wanted to make it out to be. I remember some sort of mention like they associated it with like minorities and tried to make it seem like only dirty, only minorities or only people in the ghetto smoke weed or something like that. And so it was like a stigma, part of the stigma. And then everybody was drinking alcohol. Like one of the notes that I wrote down here is that it's kind of ironic to me that alcohol causes a shitload of problems out there in comparison to marijuana. I mean, it's kind of like a joke. It doesn't seem like there's any comparison at all in terms of the risk versus benefit analysis. I'm going to actually post this on the, in addition to this, as an addendum to this podcast, but there's this guy, Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you heard of him, but he's like a Stanford scientist, and he did, appraisal of the evidence for both alcohol, the effects and the side effects, the deleterious effects of alcohol, and then cannabis. And alcohol is basically terrible for us. Like it really fucks a lot of people up. It is poisonous, and it causes problems in a lot of organs and systems in the body. And there's really basically concluded that there's no real healthy dose. Whereas they used to say like the French paradox and all that shit. Not that I mentioned some of the side effects of marijuana. Some people might have psychosis. It's going to impair your driving, of course. It could cause anxiety as well as treat it. So what do you think about that? As I mentioned earlier to you before we started rolling, there are some people that have succeeded in getting off of hard drugs by doing cannabis.
Yeah, I think that I think that it's a great outlet for people who are trying to get off hard drugs. Just to give them something and to like it can satisfy some of those like inner cravings to get high. Give them something habitually to do, that is puts them in a mind altering state, and may subside some of those withdrawal effects as well, depending on what kind of drugs they're trying to get off of. Um, and also maybe kind of provide some self reflection. I think that if there's one thing that marijuana can provide to all of us is some serious self awareness. Sometimes in a critical sense.
Explain. Give me a for instance of that.
Maybe like you get a little too high and you kind of your heart rate starts racing a little bit, and you kind of start thinking about like a situation that you may have handled earlier that day. Maybe let's say like with your kids, you were out with your kids and they wanted something at the grocery store, and they were just nagging and nagging and nagging you, and maybe you didn't handle the situation very well. Maybe you kind of exploded, showed some frustration that could have come across as anger towards your children in that moment, just because it was a stressful day. You were trying to get in and out of the grocery store. You didn't handle the situation very well, and then later that night you're kind of thinking about it, and you're almost kind of having a little bit of anxiety, and you're like, I'm a terrible parent. Like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. Yada yada. And then you're like, well, I guess, I could have handled it this way, I could have handled it that way, and you kind of kind of almost like work through that problem in kind of a therapeutic way, where at first you kind of feel like a piece of shit, and that's giving you anxiety. But then you work through it some more, and then you kind of come to a place where you're like, okay, it's okay. I can't, no one's perfect, and I'm going to learn from this experience and move on and try and correct myself again when I enter another situation that's similar to that one.
So in that sense, it's like it helps you contemplate things.
Yeah, it helps you contemplate things for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I asked for a clarification there because that's something that I've experienced myself, and maybe it might arrive in the form of like an anxiety, or it could be laughing, right? We could be watching something the other day. I love to laugh, but none of us laughed enough. So I'm watching, I'm online or whatever, and I see there's this short, and it was like a Jerry Springer episode, and I'm watching Jerry Springer, and there's some of the crazy Jerry Springer show, and I was laughing my ass off for like a good minute just at this thing. I watched the entire. Now it's going to be one of my things. It's like therapy, and I'm going to watching these 10-minute Jerry Springer episode, and it's going to magnify. I'm going to contemplate it, and enjoy it, and but yeah, that's a positive. Well, both of those examples are positive, but the contemplative aid thing is, I think, it's true, and I've experienced that. So what about the? Again, it's a big quite the ball of wax, but the war on drugs. If we legalized all drugs, what would happen? Do you think that that's something that, like, some people are pro, like
I think part of the fun of drugs, being such a problem is the high that people get for breaking the law, So I actually think that we would see less issues personally if we spent the amount of money that we spend fighting drugs, if we spent that money instead helping drug addicts, and I think that we would see a huge difference. Also, if we legalize all drugs, those drugs, listen, people are going to do drugs whether they want to or if they want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality, right? And they do. That's also the reality. And so, I think that like we would probably we would certainly see more tax revenue, right? And then we would we would, well, listen, we would questionably disarm, the cartels and things of that nature. But it's really hard to say because, technically you could go back to earlier in this conversation where I was saying that, we're still battling the illicit market. So now that the illicit market is set up, we would just battle. It would probably just be the channels have already been set up, so it could be hard to battle that. But, listen, I certainly think that all, psychedelics should be, legal. But some of the other drugs, I do understand that they are pretty serious, and people lose control, obviously, of themselves. And it can go down a path that no one wants to go down. But listen, what do you? I would spin the question and say, here's not a conspiracy theory. Here's a real reality, right? Is it a war on drugs, or is it a mass lobbying from the pharmaceutical industry to make it so that they have a monopoly on selling illicit drugs in a legal fashion?
Right. Oh yeah, man. Well, the whole the fentanyl thing, and trying to think of the name of the show.
Well, yeah. Think about it. I can go to a doctor and I can get Adderall, which is essentially meth. Mm-hmm. Right? I can go to a doctor and I can get fentanyl and Oxycontin, which is essentially heroin. Chemical structure. Just few chemical structures away from those drugs, right? Mm-hmm. So. And the list goes on. Yeah. So, the reality is that the war on drugs is honestly, it's kind of bullshit,
Yeah. What was I going to say? The schedule thing I mentioned earlier, and I know very little about this, but I know Schedule 1 narcotic is that. Currently, cannabis is on that list. That's why it's federally illegal, because it's up there with these other villainous meds or drugs like cocaine, heroin, etc. Most authorities that I've read up on have declared that it certainly doesn't belong on that level with it. But as a result of its schedule, it cannot be researched as readily. Right, so that's a downside too, right? So I'm just reading up that there's some more and more research being done, like you mentioned, terpenes and the entourage effect and the different strains and stuff. If we could kind of research those things and cultivate them and select for the best possible product, which I know that it's underway, these things are happening, but if we could kind of break it down and measure twice and cut once and figure out what the most valuable properties of these medicines are, and then it would be safer for everybody. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but I wanted to ask that question because this is part of that whole discussion. Let's see what else I have on my list there. To birthday, so future cannabis, therapeutic benefits, cool shit. Anything that I'm missing that is really friggin' cool about? How about this? This is the theme of this podcast there, Drew. The Making Motivation podcast. So, what motivates you to get up and go to work every day? I'm sure that there are some things, like family obviously is one, but about your work, like what motivates you to do it, to start your own cannabis company or be involved?
Ego.
Hey, I appreciate the honesty, man. So, but also, it sounds like you've been in this industry for a long time. You know your shit. Obviously, otherwise people wouldn't be paying you to fly out to